Thank you very much for having me. As I said, this is my first time in Brooklyn, so I don't know if you say Arba Amot Chadashot here, but for me it's Arba Amot Chadashot. So when we think of characterizing characters, one other comment I'll say, I wasn't born in America, and my English, I might lose a word or two, I might ask you for help if I get stuck, okay? So let's just keep that in mind. So characterizing characters of the Bible, of the Tanakh, is not easy, especially because the Tanakh usually does a pretty good job of showing us different points of view of one character, meaning it doesn't simplify the characters, it doesn't make them look amazing, it doesn't make them have one point of view. And I think that David is probably the character that we have the hardest time doing that, just because we have so many different points of view on this character. Meaning, if I had to choose one character in the Tanakh, that the Tanakh itself, before we go to Chazal and Midrashim and other Mekorot, gives us a different nekudot mabat, different points of view on the character, I think it's David. And I think the reason it also comes across so clearly is that we have David of Shmuel, we have David of Divrei Hayamim, we have David of Tehillim, and if that's not enough, come Chazal and give us another level or another different kind of point of view on David HaMelech. What I want to try to do today is to try to characterize a little bit how these different books show us who David HaMelech is, what are the special things we see about David HaMelech and Shmuel, versus what are the other things that we'll see in Divrei Hayamim, what will come across in Tehillim, and then what, after all these 3 points of view, Chazal still feel is lacking and feel that they have to fill in, because without that point of view, we're still missing something about David. So it's really trying to see David HaMelech from a full perspective and trying to see how Tehillim sits in this whole, character that we see from different points of view. So I think the best starting point would be Sefer Shmuel. Sefer Shmuel, which I understand, if you reach Tehillim, I am under the assumption you did.
We did Divrei Hayamim also.
You did Divrei Hayamim too, so then we're excellent. So you did it when you did Melachim?
We did it in the order of the Keter.
Yafe. So it's after Melachim. So there's a handout here. So, let me just see that I have one. Sorry, I just gave away mine. Thank you. So, Sefer Shmuel, actually, we started saying he is the first point of view, is very clear by building David up slowly but surely from when he comes to be this young, talented, I would say na'al, what you not child exactly, but teenager maybe, until he actually becomes a king. And we see very, very carefully his successes and his failures. The Navi starts emphasizing especially David as what would you think? You studied Shmuel. What would be the main character that you think comes across in Sefer Shmuel of David HaMelech? I'm asking. That would be maybe at the end of, but what would be if we look at David's journey throughout Sefer Shmuel? I think that the most dominant feature we could see is really David the fighter, meaning you can see David very clearly when he maket Plishtim beKaila, when he hurts the Plishtim in Kaila, and then he hurts the Amalekim in Siklag, and I can go on further on, but mainly what we see is David time after time as this fighter, as this person who knows how to lehachnia. How would you say lehachnia? To what? Subdue. Thank you. To subdue his enemies, and then that would be probably the main characteristic we would see. Next to it, there's one other thing that's very much emphasized in Sefer Shmuel, I think, and that is also what happens in David's personal life. we see him within his family. We see him and his siblings. We see him and his wife. We see like these two, I would say, main features. First, we see him as this warrior, as this, person who knows how to fight the battles. And we see him in his family and how his family life relates to what his personal development is from when he's this teenager to very, very talented teenager until he becomes a king. And then when we reach Shmuel Bet, we actually see again how David is accepted upon the whole nation, how he chooses to make the capital a city that didn't belong to anyone and wasn't owned by any tribe, in order for it to be accessible and to reason well with every single one of the 12 tribes of Israel. So he's really a king of everyone. And then we see very nicely how he addresses Aron Elohim, how the centerpiece that he wants to have in his kingship will be Aron Elohim. And again, we go back to our starting point, which is David the Lochem. David fighting Milchamot Yisrael, and that's actually what he does almost till the end of his life. So, in a nutshell, I would say that's David of Sefer Shmuel. We hear a lot about his growth, his personal growth. We hear a lot about how he became a king, how he made sure everyone around him, the nations around him, would accept the fact that he's ruling and that Israel in his time, Yehuda and Israel, are strong. And we see how his personal life comes along and develops as he goes along. Sometimes, and this is very once in a while, I guess, can I have that smaller Tanakh? I see this one. I mean, this was so exciting, but sorry. Thank you. Sometimes, once in a while, we do see a few other little points that are pointed out in a manner that gives us like an insight, a brief insight to another point of view that doesn't take over the whole story, but it gives us this like, whoa, there's something else about it. I think the first time we see it in a very fascinating way is in Shmuel Aleph Perek Tet Zayin in Pasuk Yud Chet, when we're introduced to David, and it says, ויען אחד מהנערים ויאמר הנה ראיתי בן לישי בית הלחמי יודע נגן וגיבור חיל ואיש מלחמה ונבון דבר ואיש תואר ואדוני עמו. That's like the first time the pasuk actually comes and tells us something about David. And what do we hear? We hear that he's Yodea Nagin. Why am I emphasizing the fact that he also knows how to play? Because the other characteristics aren't surprising. Meaning, to hear that someone is Gibor Chayil, Veish Milchama, Unevon Davar, and even the fact that he's Ishtar, those are things, maybe I should translate, the fact that he's very strong, and that he's a man of wars, and he's smart, or Nevon is even more than smart. He has some kind of extra talent in the way he thinks, and ve'ishtoar, and that he looks well. Maybe he's someone who from far you could see he's a man that can be a king. All those characteristics, I would say, aren't surprising to hear. But to hear that he knows how to play, v'yodeh again, that shows us something a little bit different. Another example is in Shmuel Bet, Perek Kaf Gimel. In the first, here you see something that's a little different. The whole chapter is a little different. But here we see David's running away, and he's thankful to Hashem that he saved him from Shaul. And here we see David saying, וידבר דוד להשם את דברי השירה הזאת, ביום הציל אדוני אותו מכף כל אויביו ומכף שאול. So here we're getting the first time an insight to what might be later something that will sound very familiar to us. What? Oh, thank you very much. וידבר השם, Hashem says, וידבר דוד להשם, David says to Hashem, את דברי השירה הזאת, this song, ביום הציל השם אותו, the day that Hashem saved him and rescued him, מכף כל אויביו, from all his enemies, ומכף שאול, and from Shaul. Now, here we see a unique chapter about David. All of a sudden we learn a new characteristic of his, and here we hear a song. And it's a little more similar to something that we might later find familiar when we reach Tehillim. But we have this chapter that gives us an insight to David the singer. And we see this whole shirah. Does it go together with the fact that he was ish nagen, that he knew how to play, that he knew how to play an instrument? I don't know. But it's already the second characteristic that we see, that's not only David the fighter, not only David that can conquer areas and can make sure that all his people live in peace. Let's see another characteristic that's a little surprising. Again, in Shmuel Bet, in this specific chapter, we also hear את דברי השירה הזאת. And sorry, just one more thing about this chapter before we go on. I forgot to say, not only is it like what we see in Tehillim, but in Tehillim chapter 18, which you probably saw, is a parallel chapter to this shirah. Meaning, it's the only place, I think, that the Tanakh Mamash Ke'ilu gives us a reference to Tehillim from Sefer Shmuel. He's talking about David HaMelech in Sefer Shmuel, and he's like referring us and saying, there is more of this. You see, here's like a hafnaya, here's a point for you to compare or to note. We don't see this, just so you understand the difference, we don't see this when we discuss Shlomo, for instance. We know Shlomo HaMelech wrote Kohelet, we know Shlomo HaMelech wrote Shir HaShirim, but when you read the chapters about Shlomo in Sefer Melachim, they don't connect so easily to what we see about Shlomo in Shir HaShirim and Kohelet. They connect topically, meaning we can understand why Shlomo in his different stages of his life would write a book like Shir HaShirim or would write a book like Kohelet. He who had so much wealth and so much intelligence and there were so many women and everything he had, we understand why he would be asking philosophical questions in Sefer Kohelet. But there's no reference in a way that we don't see any of the verses from Kohelet showing up in any kind of bridged way in the chapters that discuss Shlomo HaMelech. Or like I was mentioned here, someone who wrote the book of Sefer Chizkel. I'll give another example. Many times I feel like if only Chizkel the prophet was mentioned in any other part of this Tanakh, I would feel better to understand how he's situated. Did he know Yirmiyahu? Did he not know Yirmiyahu? Did they ever meet? Did they never meet? I don't know. I want to say what Sefer Melachim couldn't just note, and in Galut Yoyachin, one of the exiles was Yechezkel. Sefer Yirmiyahu couldn't say, I'm saying this to conquer or to disagree with a prophet who's prophesying at the same time somewhere else, and this is kind of an ideological conversation we're having, or a follow-up, so it's very rare that we have the example like we have here in David HaMelech, where not only does he have many different characteristics, but when our starting point, Sefer Shmuel, has this conversation in a roundabout way, the way the Tanakh knows how to do it, with a different point of view about David HaMelech that we're going to see when we reach Tehillim. And that's done through this chapter. So, and now I'll go to the next example I wanted to go. Shmuel Bet, chapter 8, Perek Chet, Pasuk Tetvav. Those of you holding Tanachim. And here again we see another characteristic. I start with it because I think it's less unique than the fact that he was minagen, and the fact that he plays, and the fact that he does Tehillim, and that he says a chapter like Tehillim. Here it says, "Vayimloch David al kol Israel." David's kingship was on all of Israel. "Vayehi David oseh mishpat utzedakah lechol amo." So here we hear that David is also a judge, and he does mishpat utzedakah. He does justice to the nation. So we already have David who knows how to play an instrument, I guess. We have David who also knows how to sing, like the Mizmor of Tehillim, but it shows up in Shmuel. And we also know that he knows how to do justice. This is important here because unlike Shlomo HaMelech, we don't have stories of him being a judge in the same manner at all. So to say that he also knows how to do justice adds a point of view to his character that we might not have known if we just read through the stories that you are seeing. We also see his doing justice actually materializing earlier in Shmuel Aleph Perek Lamed, Pasuk Kaf Hey, where you see how he gives out the shalal after he finishes a war, and then he says he gives out shalal, loot?
Booty.
Loot, how do you say?
Booty.
Booty, thank you. I don't know why I got confused. Vayhi ma'ayam ha'u v'mala, from that day and on, וישימיה לחוק ולמשפט לישראל עד היום הזה. So here's another one. I was gathering what we can know about Shmuel, how we can see his character throughout these chapters. So you see, not only does he does justice, he also makes sure his rulings will carry on from now and for the future. So he's not only worried about stabilizing the country and make sure that all the Israelites live in a peaceful land, he's also making sure that they have a justice society and that rules are made. Remember, it didn't happen before. In the time of the Shoftim, each Shofet, judge, had his own territory, his own shevet, his own tribe, and different rulings were done in different places. And when Shaul came, he did not institutionalize a justice system. So we see David HaMelech, who's arranging the kingship in Israel, it also makes sure that there will be laws that are institutionalized. And now the last character that I want to show in Sefer Shmuel, which I think is very important. Let's go to Shmuel Bet Perek Vav, Pasuk Yudaled. And here Aron Hashem is coming to finally back home, and you see the very famous story where David is really dancing in front of Aron Hashem. He's really dancing in front of God. And it says, ודוד מחרקר בכל עוז לפני השם, ודוד חגור אפוד בד. And not only does it say that David is dancing, but mecharker b'chol oz means that his whole body is moving around in front of HaKadosh Baruch Hu. And not only that, he's wearing this special, unique cloth that's part of this whole, I guess maybe, I want to, hakdasha that he gives to HaKadosh Baruch Hu. And not only that, he's willing later to become, when he has his conversation with Michal, to be shafel beinei Hashem. He doesn't care how it looks, and he wants to build Beit HaMikdash. And here we see his connection to HaKadosh Baruch Hu, that it's not a regular connection. It's not like he worships God like everyone. He's willing to go and do things that are out of everyone's comfort zone, including his wife. He looks ridiculous to everyone because he feels that's what demonstrates that he's first of all God's servant. That's David HaMelech in Sefer Shmuel. You would almost say, so what's there different for Sefer Divrei Yamim left? What's so different about David and Divrei Yamim that we don't see in Sefer Shmuel? So I wrote down for myself 3 main points that I think differentiate what we see in David HaMelech in Sefer Divrei Yamim from Sefer Shmuel. The first thing is that Sefer Divrei Yamim, as you probably know, is busy always with the point of view of Malchei Yehuda. It always comes to tell us the story of Malchei Yehuda. And that's why very prominent stories that have to do with Israel or the kings of Israel or history of what happened in those times we'll never find in the Divrei Yamim, because really it's interested only with what happened with Malchei Yehuda. So that's a point of view. But you would think that everything to do with David could replicate itself, right? Duplicate itself, because he's a Melech of Yehuda. So what's a different story that we would find in Divrei Yamim that's so different from Shmuel? So I think it's clear when we think about it that there are many details about David HaMelech that come up in Divrei Yamim and don't show up in Shmuel, and many details that come up in Shmuel and don't show up in Divrei Yamim. And the common denominator is always David coming out good. If Sefer Shmuel is willing to tell us stories about David that aren't exactly stories that complement David, is everything okay? that aren't exactly stories that put David in the spotlight in a good way. That's Sefer Shmuel. Sefer Divrei Hayamim makes sure we only hear the positive Davidic stories. And that's why Sefer Divrei Hayamim will add a whole list of events to tell us how good David was as far as making sure the country works well, that things are organized, that people are doing their jobs, that different people have different parts of their duties and everyone knows what's going on, because Sefer Divrei Hayamim really wants to demonstrate clearly how a good David was, and he also gives some very long lectures explaining the logic of what he does, and how he's connected to HaKadosh Baruch Hu. What will we never find in Sefer Divrei Hayamim? I mean, what kind of stories will we never see? We definitely, again, will see Beit HaMikdash plans are much more detailed. His wanting to to build Beit HaMikdash is very detailed. But the wars, the whole Shaul HaMelech stuff that's out, the whole Batsheva stuff is out, exactly. Even the wars he does are bridged very briefly to say he won here and he won here and everything's okay here and everything's okay here. But it's not, the complication of the wars will never show up there, and we won't find ourselves thinking to ourselves, he could have done a better job. That will rarely happen when we read Sefer Divrei Hayamim. We'll feel that often when we read Sefer Shmuel. Number 2. In Sefer Divrei Hayamim, Sefer Divrei Hayamim Bet Perek Chet, Pasuk Yudalid, he is called, I'm looking at Aleph, sorry. He is called, I'll read maybe the Pasuk. Perek Chet, Pasuk Yudalid. He is called, Vayamed Kemishpat David Aviv. We are talking about Shlomo HaMelech, when he finishes building Beit HaMikdash, and look how he's related to David, and it says about Shlomo, V'yamed Kemishpat David Aviv, he did customaries like David his father did. I'm skipping. Ki ken mitzvat David ish ha'Elohim, because that is what David said, left in his instructions to be done in Beit HaMikdash, and he gets the amazing title, which we really find in the Tanakh, which is Ish HaElohim. He was a man of God, a God's man or a man of God. And you could see that because he's a man of God, obviously you won't hear about Chet David v'Batsheva, you won't hear about Amnon and Tamar, you won't hear about Mered of Shalom, you won't hear about Sheva ben Bichri, you won't hear how he aged. All that's out. Meaning Ish HaElohim has a character of someone who has basically very little or no faults at all. And that's David HaMelech of Divrei Hayamim. The last thing I just want to emphasize that we see in Divrei Hayamim before we move on to Tehillim and Chazal is that it emphasizes a lot how many preparations he does for Beit HaMikdash. He couldn't build Beit HaMikdash, he was told not to. But he brings Aron Hashem, that's definitely mentioned clearly. He does everything he can to institutionalize the building of the Beit HaMikdash in the future. It's also bringing the Aron from Kiryat Yearim to Jerusalem in a very detailed manner. If you think about it, if you think of the story, it would make for us sense to hear that already in Melachim, in Shmuel. Why do we hear it in such detail here? And how exactly it will work when it finally gets built. All the detailed instructions are here. The place is here. The finances are here. Meaning, what does Divrei Hayamim want to emphasize? Yes, he did not do everything. He did not build Beit HaMikdash because Hashem didn't let him, but he did everything in his power to prepare for Beit HaMikdash. And really Rashi says that. Rashi says it very clearly, and it's in your first source of your handout. Rashi says in Divrei Hayamim Perek Yud Pasuk Aleph, before we start hearing about David, וכאשר בא לספר מעשה דוד, אינו מספר זולתו אלא גבורתו וגדולתו, כי הספר שלו ולמלכי יהודה. Rashi says, and when this book, Divrei Yamim, comes to talk about David, he doesn't say anything besides how good he is, his gvura, his, help me, gvura, courage, what? Strength. Yeah, it's more than that. What a big person he is. Because the book is really for him. The book is really to say how big David HaMelech was. So when we see that, we see really two, I would say, characters. We see David of Shmuel, which is a more complicated, roundabout character. He does a lot of wars. He has faults. He has successes. He has failures. And we see the Isha Elohim in Divrei Yamim, which is really David HaMelech, all as a servant of God. When I think of David HaMelech of Divrei Yamim, I think of this. I think of someone who's really has his head totally recognizing that God is above him. Contrary to Shlomo, that always walked probably like this. And forgot sometimes to kind of lower his head or bend his head a little bit down. Maybe if he would do that, we wouldn't end up having so much of a dazah at the end of his days. But the Isha Elohim that I visualize when I think of David of Divrei Yamim really has this anava, really has this, how do you say anava? He's humble enough to really look down, not always look up, and not always think that that the sky's the limit. And when he's told not to build Beit HaMikdash, he doesn't build Beit HaMikdash. He does everything he can. That's David HaMelech. So, what does the Midrash do of it? Before we go to Sefer Melachim, I do want to say what bothers the Midrash or Chazal already at this standing point. So, when you look at, maybe I should say, the pasuk, I will say the pasuk. When the pasuk says, "V'David barach v'yimalet v'yavo el Shmuel ha'ramata v'yagid lo et kol asher asa leShaul hagam Shaul v'Nevi'im." When the pasuk says in Sefer Shmuel that David ran away and came to Shmuel and tell him everything that happened, you would think that this is like a simple situation, right? David ran away and he told Shmuel what happened to him. What does the Medrash say? The Medrash says, I say, bring on your head sheet. ודוד ברח וימלט ויבוא אל שאול, ורב הונא ורבי יוסי אומר, אותו הלילה שברח דוד מלפני שאול, למד משמואל הנביא מה שאין תלמיד ותיק לומד ב100 שנה. And this is very interesting. The Medrash wants to emphasize something that we didn't hear yet, not in Shmuel and not in Divrei Yamim. The night that David ran away from Shaul, he came to Shmuel, and that night he learned from Shmuel what a very learned student learns in 100 years. So what's the part that the Midrash wants to add about David's characteristic? What is it that we didn't hear yet that the Midrash here fills in and tells us, the Yalkut Shimoni fills in and tells us something else about David we didn't hear yet? What is it when he says that he learned from Shmuel something that no other student can learn even in 100 years?
Sounds like Navon Davar.
You like?
Navon Davar.
Navon Davar, what do you mean?
Someone who's intelligent, able to...
He's very, very capable. He's very, very smart. And what does he learn from Shmuel? Torah. What?
Connection to the past.
Connection to the past. So I think all these things characterize this mifgash, this connection, but it either makes him have a special connection to God. Shmuel's a Navi. He learns here what someone else learns in 100 years. Maybe it makes him a Talmid Chacham, right? He learns Torah. He's sitting with the Navi and he's learning Torah. Why was that missing maybe in Shmuel and in Divrei Yamim? Because Shmuel, we had this person who knew how to fight wars. We had this person who had so many personal issues with with his family, with Shaul, etc. Then we have in Sefer Divrei Yamim, Isha Elohim. But we never heard yet of David as a Talmid Chacham, right? He wasn't Moshe Rabbeinu yet. He didn't get a Torah. Wasn't Yoshua. He didn't get Smicha from Moshe. He wasn't a Kohen. He wasn't a Levi. He didn't have an aspect of being a Talmid Chacham. And here comes the Medrash and he fills in this gap. And he tells us, wait a minute. He's not only what you see in Sefer Shmuel, and he's not only what you see in Sefer Divrei Yamim, he's also a Talmid Chacham. And really, this Talmid Chacham part gives us another maybe nekudat mamat, another point of view to who really is David HaMelech. I want to go on and see another midrash. You have it's your second source on your sheet, to ask, can we really put together this? Are you missing something? Did you lose me somewhere along the lines?
No, I was just wondering where the story is with Abigail and Nabal.
Abigail. So you think of the logic and you tell me.
It would be where...
It would be where all his personal stories and issues. So where would it show up? In Sefer Shmuel. Exactly. It works. So what I want to emphasize is, okay, so we saw David of Shmuel, we saw David of Divrayim, we see Chazal putting another aspect of him being this Talmid Chacham. And now let's go on to the Midrash Tehillim, the second Midrash you have on your sheet. ומיהו המשובח שבנביאים והמשובח שבמלכים? המשובח שבנביאים זה משה. המשובח שבמלכים זה דוד. Here's another connection. Who's the best prophet and who's the best king? The best prophet is Moshe. The best king is David. אתה מוצא, you find. כל מה שעשה משה עשה דוד. Everything that Moshe Rabbeinu did, David did. משה הוציא את ישראל ממצרים. Moshe led Israel out of Egypt. ודוד הוציא את ישראל משעבוד גלויות. And David made sure every person in Israel wasn't in the galut anymore, but he had his independent country here in Israel. משה עשה מלחמה בסיחון ואוג. Moshe did a fight with the nations in Ever HaYarden and the other side of the Jordan. And so did David. He did wars all around Israel. Moshe מלך על ישראל ועל יהודה, ודוד מלך על ישראל ועל יהודה. Moshe was ruled on Israel and Judah, all parts of the nation, and so did David. Moshe, which is not obvious because, for instance, the judges, each one had their own. Shaul had their own. Each different kings had different portions of the nation. Moshe קרא לישראל את הים. Look how far this goes. ודוד קרא לישראל את הנהרות, and also David tiered rivers. Moshe bana mizbeach and David bana mizbeach. Zekri v'zekri. They both had mizbechot. They both sacrificed at sacrifices. Moshe natan 5 חומשי תורה לישראל. And now we're reaching Tehillim. ודוד נתן 5 ספרים שבתהילים לישראל. So how do the Chazal view the extra contribution of Tehillim? Tehillim is a fulfillment of David's walking in the path of Moshe Rabbeinu. Meaning, he's not only the king we heard about in Sefer Shmuel. He's not only the king we heard about in Sefer Divrei Hayamim. He's also a leader, second only to Moshe Rabbeinu. And just like Moshe Rabbeinu gave us the Torah and gave us 5 chumashim, David HaMelech gave us 5 ספרים שבתהילים. Not only that, did David HaMelech give all the books in Tehillim? So that's already, Chazal asked that question. And you can see 2 approaches. One approach is in Masechet Psachim Kuf Yud Zayin Amud Bet. היה רבי מאיר אומר, it's in the next source on your sheet, כל תשבחות האמורות בספר תהילים, every single thing that's the תשבחות that said in ספר תהילים, David Amar, Kulan David Amaram. They were all the compliments in Sefer Tehillim were all said by David. שנאמר, קלו תפילות דוד בן ישי, אל תקרא קלו, אלא כל אלו. Not קלו meaning ending, finished, קלו, but כל אלו. Reread it, it's all of these were written by David. The Gemara in Bava Batra, which is a famous Gemara because it's the one we always go to when we want to hear reference for who wrote which book in the Bible, says like this. I obviously cut the sources shorter, but Miktavan, who wrote them? Moshe katav sifro. Moshe Rabbeinu wrote his book, meaning the Torah. Veparashat Bilam ve'Iyov. Yoshua katav sifro. But not only that, also the verses in the Torah that were written after Moshe died. V'shmona psukim shebatorah. Shmuel katav sifro. V'shoftim ve'Ruth. And David katav sefer Tehillim. David wrote the book of Tehillim. Al yedei 10 zkenim, but not by himself. He had 10 elderlies, zkenim. Of course, zkenim in the time of the Tanakh, Ziknei Eda is important people of the community. Al Yedei, and who are the 10 people? Adam Arishon, Malkitzedek, Avraham, Moshe, Haiman, Yedutun, Asaph, and Shlosha Bnei Korach. So according to Chazal, it's not necessarily that David himself wrote the whole book of Tehillim, but it could be that he wrote it, or maybe instruction or supervising other people. Why do I want to say that? Because that kind of opens to us the possibility, did David write the whole book of Tehillim? Maybe, and maybe not. I will say, for just so to note, that out of all the Mizmorim and Tehillim, 73 of them actually have the title Le David. Meaning 73 of the Mizmorim and Tehillim are definitely noted that they are Le David. And by the way, out of them, 13 are connected to specific incidents in David's life. So it's obvious that most of Tehillim, or almost most, or almost half of Tehillim, however you want to count, is definitely written by David and is connected to his personal life in different manners. Did he write the whole book of Tehillim? We don't know. Okay? So what did Chazal actually... So we see Chazal, either he wrote the whole Tehillim or maybe not. But again, how do Chazal demonstrate what was the writing of Tehillim? What's the contents of Tehillim? Who is David in Tehillim? And here I want to go to the next source, in the Bavli Masechet Brachot. Amar Rav Yoshaya Amar Avacha, Hachi ke Amar David, Me'olam lo avar alai chatzot alayla b'shena. David says, I never was sleeping at midnight. Rabbi Zeir Omer, Ad chatzot alayla haya mitnamnem kesus. Until midnight, he was kind of on-off, dazing off. Mikan va'elach haya mitgaber kari. From midnight, he was totally awake like a lion. Rav Ashi Amar, Ad chatzot alayla haya osek b'divrei Torah. Until midnight, he would learn Torah. From then and on, he used to sing shirot v'tishbachot. It was when he sang songs that thanked God. I can't think of a better translation, but shirot and tishbachot kind of says them both. Thanking and praising, and yeah. Let's go a little further. Amar Rabbi Shimon ben Chasta, jumping to the row one before the last in the middle, where there you see nekudatayim. Kinor haya talui lemala mimitato shel David. There was a violin hanging on top of David's bed. Vekevan shehigia chatzot laila, and when midnight came, ba ruach tzfonit, came a wind from the north. Venoshevet bo v'nagen me'elav, and the violin started playing on its own. Miyad haya omed, the minute that happened, he used to stand. Ve'osek b'torah, he used to learn Torah. Ad she'ala amud hashachar. Okay, so you see again that he really was totally engaged in Torah learning. And the question, whether the Torah learning, the Tehillim Prakim were Torah learning, or more like songs of prayers, is a question we don't have an answer. And we also don't know if we can be critical that Torah becomes songs. Because if you see in Masechet Sotah, the next source, it says, Mipnei ma ne'enash David, and this is very surprising in my mind, Mipnei shekara ledivrei Torah zmirot. Because when he was learning Torah, and that's Sefer Tehillim, he called it words of songs, or he called it, what would you translate zmirot to be? Music. So you see very clearly kind of a tension, a slight tension, between the question, what characteristic, and here I want to go where we started for a minute, to the different characteristics of David HaMelech, and say, what is the missing piece? We had David HaMelech as the lochem, right, the fighter, and we had David HaMelech with the complicated family, and then we had David HaMelech in Divrei Yamim, which was totally God's servant and the king of Israel that really established Israel and what would be Beit HaMikdash. And then come Chazal and tell us, and then we have Tehillim. And what is Tehillim all about? I won't have a final answer at the end of this lesson. So I'm not going to say, so now we know it's. I don't know. What is Tehillim all about? In my mind, is part of the big question. Is Tehillim more about praising God, singing? Does it relate to his being Yodea Nagen, to the fact that he really knew how to play, to the fact that he would dance, that we know he was a character of dancing? Or is Tehillim all about learning Torah? Is Tehillim the first maybe version of a scholarly text of what happens to a person who takes his personal life and sits and learns Torah? And that's why we see, 73 Mizmorim that are connected to him, and 13 of them are specifically connected to events of his life, but that means there are probably even more, just not all of them have the first verse telling us which event it was related to. So here we see clearly that there's an aspect missing. Even though we have David, also in Shmuel, such detail, also in Divrei Yamim, in such detail, we have clearly an aspect missing. We want our first king, we want our role model. By the way, just to say, I called my oldest son David, David Israel, and it's very meaningful in my mind. He's already 18 years old now, but I thought it then too, because this character that has so many different parts to it, and we don't put it in like a flat way. We don't say, oh, he's this, or he's that, or he's that. To my mind, demonstrates much in a very deep way who we are, meaning, and who we want to be. We want to be people working Hashem that have different parts of our character, that resemble different things, that hold on to, especially if we're, in a modern Orthodox world when we're trying to do this and this and this and this. So here's David HaMelech telling us we could do this and we can be this and we can do this. And there's another aspect we can't forget, and that's being an Eved Hashem, and that's learning Torah or writing songs. Each of us can go home understanding that aspect of his life however they want. But if we ask ourselves, what's the content? I know you're only in Perek 25 or Kafeh or something, but let me for a minute say, if we look a minute at the context of what would be on all what we hear about David, then we don't see usually in Sefer Tehillim, very rarely, the punishments Hashem brought on enemies. We won't usually see, it's not these plakim that we have in Nevi'im of revenge. It's not the plakim that we see in Nevi'im of God's getting, it's not Milchemet Gog uMagog. It's really, what we really have there, when we see David, is David, the first shepherd of Israel, who really is connecting to God in a deep way and manner, who's calling him when he's in trouble, who's praying to him when he needs help, who he feels Hashem is extremely accessible to him. I would even say sometimes to hold an intimate conversation. It's amazing when we look at Tehillim that there's one chapter of Tehillim that was found in Qumran. I assume everyone knows that Qumran is, the caves of Qumran. We found Megillot that were not known to anyone. They were found. They had the bad luck of being found in the year the state of Israel was institutionalized. So it took a few years till they were recognized. And so much with, it's hard to compete with the events in Israel sometimes. That was the first thing when we came here 3 or 4 years ago for a year. My kids used to tell me, "How come the news here never moves? Like you can hear news in the morning and then news the next evening, and they're basically saying the same thing." In Israel, if you would hear news in the morning and news the next day, you would miss everything that happened in a day. And I told my kids, listen, I don't know, there isn't so much to say here, I guess. It doesn't go in that pace. So this year was an extreme year in Israel's life, because we had the state of Israel, but we also found this Mizmor, but it was only publicized, 10 or 20 years ago, because it took a few years for everything to come out. It's amazing because it got the nickname Mizmor Kuf Nun Aleph, the 151th Mizmor. It was found in Qumran with Sefer Tehillim as the last Mizmor, and it was found also, it was known to us before from Targum HaShivim, from, how would you say, the Septuaginta, the Septuagint. So I want to read to you because I feel, when I first saw it, I said to myself, wow, this is part of an answer to a question of what does Tehillim say. Meaning, someone here tied up, I don't know if it was a lost Mizmor of David himself, or if it was someone later, this is very early, the Qumran stuff, and it already is, wasn't written then, but it's self-telling about what is added about David. So I want to read it with you. You have it on your handout. Hallelujah לדוד בן ישי. קטן הייתי מנכי וצעיר מבני אבי. Hallelujah to David ben Yishai. I was smaller than my brothers and the smallest of the sons of my father. It's written like a song. וישימני רועה לצונו. Of course, it's not a typo. This is how it's written in Megillot Qumran. So tzono wouldn't have an aleph, and it's written, don't expect this to be written or sound like a modern text. וישימני רועה לצונו, he put me to be a shepherd for his sheep. ומושל בגדיותיו, and I ruled his gdayim, his sheep. ידיי עשו עוגב. I used to play the ugav. What's the ugav? How do you say ugav? The harp. ואצבעותיי כינור. I did the harp and the violin. ואשימה להשם כבוד. And I brought recognition and honor to God. ואמרתי אני בנפשי, and I said to my soul, ההרים לא יעידו לו, והגבעות לא יגידו. What the mountains aren't saying, and what the parallel word for mountains aren't saying. עלו העצים את דברי והצאן את מעשיי. I will say throughout the trees and throughout the sheep. כי מי יגיד ומי ידבר ומי יספר את מעשי אדון הכל. Who's going to be out there to demonstrate all of God's great deeds? ראה אלוה הכל, הוא שמע והוא האזין. He's seen everything, he's heard and he's listened. שלח נביאו למושכני את שמואל לגדלני. He sent Shmuel הנביא to appoint me for a king, to raise me. יצאו אחי לקראתו יפה התואר ויפה המראה. My brothers that were well looking went out to him, that looked well went out towards Shmuel. הגבוהים בקומתם, היפים בשערם, they looked so nice. לא בחר השם אלוהים בם, but God did not choose them. וישלח ויקחני מאחורי הצאן וימשכני בשמן הקודש וישימני נגיד לעמו ומושל בפני בריתו. And God went and took me from behind the sheep, and I was the one that recognized as the king. And he appointed me for a nagid, for a king to his nation, and to rule the people. What is this in my mind, very touching mizmor, which is an autobiography mizmor. We don't hear that. It doesn't exist in Shmuel, it doesn't exist in Nevi'im, it doesn't exist in Chazal, it doesn't exist in Tehillim. It adds this very delicate point of view. And he actually tells us, first of all, why he's musical. Why does he have this musical talent? And he says he wanted to praise God. And that's why he has this musical talent, right? He knows, he's the person that recognizes God in the world. He knows that the trees and that the mountains are all mehalelim et Hashem, are all praising God. Thank you very much. And that's why he feels he has the obligation to pass this through. And the minute he starts praising God, then all of a sudden, the trees and the sheep, everyone kind of becomes his mediator and says this out loud. And maybe, I don't know where it's what happened first, but the way he presents it here is God saw him praising him throughout and demonstrating this throughout everything he had, and that's maybe why he chose him to be a king. And that's why he thought he and not his brothers that were so good looking, he's the one who has to be the king of Israel. And notice that the end of the Mizmor ends like the beginning, meaning it says in the beginning, Hallelujah לדוד בן ישי, קטן הייתי מאחי וצעיר מבני אבי. I was the youngest, וישימני רועה לצונו. First he put me to be the shepherd, and at the end, וישימני נגיד לעמו ומושל בפני עמו. Meaning, first he put me to be a shepherd, וישימני לרועה, and at the end, וישימני נגיד לעמו. And of course, this connection is put like in a frame of once he was over here, once he was over here. And I'll just say, that's already not something we never heard of before, because if you would see in Tehillim, Ein Chet, I'll just read one verse, then you can see, one second, Ein Chet, then you can see that this exact mashal of his being a shepherd, one second, Mem Nun Samech Ein, where is it? Here. Vayivchar, I'm reading the end of Mizmor Ein Chet, it's Psukim Ein Aleph, Ein Bet, maybe from Ein. Vayivchar beDavid avdo, he chose David his servant. Vayikacheu mimichlaot hatzon, he took him from where he was a ro'eh tzon, he was a shepherd. Me'achar alot hevi'o lir'ot beYaakov amo, he took him from being a shepherd to being the shepherd of his nation. UveYisrael nachalato. And that's actually exactly the resemblance of Hashem taking David HaMelech from being a shepherd for sheep, for Gdayim, to being a shepherd to his nation. So what do we see in this Mizmor? We see very clearly what was maybe missing when we were wondering how to tie together Shmuel and Divrei Yamim and Tehillim. Meaning, how did Tehillim come to be Tehillim? Because that was a component that characterized David HaMelech that enabled him to be the David of Sefer Shmuel and to be the David of Sefer Divrei Yamim. According to this Mizmor, he was the shepherd praising God all around. He was the person maybe singing to God, maybe playing with a harp or a violin, maybe like Chazal interpreted it, that it wasn't literally playing, it was more learning Torah, but whether it was playing or learning Torah, it was obviously devoted to HaKadosh Baruch Hu, and that's the reason why he was chosen, and that's why we hear the stories of the other two books. I want to end with a midrash that we see in Yalkut Shimoni, that in my mind is really the essence of how important David is to the world, and it also explains why he gets the most detailed description in the Tanakh in so many different points of view. The Midrash says like this: Ze Sefer Toldot HaAdam. Ha'avir, I added, HaKadosh Baruch Hu. God put in front of him, ran in front of him, lefanav, in front of Adam HaRishon, Kol HaDorot. He showed him all the generations that are to come, Adam HaRishon. Herau David Chaim Chakukin. Chakukin means he saw David and he saw his life is katsuv, has a very close end to what? He will only live for 3 hours. Katsuvin lo shalosh shaot. Amar lefanav, Adam HaRishon told the Kadosh Baruch Hu, Ribono shel olam, lo teheh takana lezeh? Is there anything I can do to improve this gzal din of 3 hours for David HaMelech? Amar, kach alta b'machshava lefanai. That is what my intention is. Amar lo, told him Adam HaRishon, how many years am I supposed to live? Amar lo, God told him, 1,000 shanim, 1,000 years. Amar lo, yesh matana barakia? Are there any gifts in heaven? God told him yes. Said Adam HaRishon to HaKadosh Baruch Hu, 70 shana mishnotai yu lemazal zeh. I want to contribute 70 years of my life to David HaMelech. Ma'asa Adam. What did Adam do? Hevi shtar v'katav alav shtar matana. He brought a certificate and he wrote that he's giving 70 years of his life to David HaMelech. V'chatam alav HaKadosh Baruch Hu. And God signed it. Okay? And now they have this shtar between between Adam HaRishon and HaKadosh Baruch Hu that gives life for David. Amar Adam, Ribono shel olam, yafyafut zo malchut v'zmirot halanu netunot lo b'matana. This dynasty, this pretty dynasty, and these prayers to God, netunot lo b'matana 70 shana, are given to him as a gift for 70 years. Sheyichyeh v'yehem mezamer lefanecha. He should live and he should praise or sing in front of you. וזה שאמר הכתוב, הנה באתי במגילת ספר כתוב אליי. So, and then the verse that's the hasmachta for this midrash. What do we actually see? It seems like from the days of the creation, mibri'at ha'olam, world was waiting for the song and the prayer of David HaMelech. And David in this manner really is a fulfillment of Adam HaRishon. He really, together, there's something more whole about the world, because it's 70 years of Adam HaRishon that we're waiting to be finished or to be fulfilled when David HaMelech finished his 70 years, which were part of Adam HaRishon's years. We never hear about Adam HaRishon, that he praises God, unfortunately. We don't hear him say thank you. That's just not part of his vocabulary, I guess. The world was gifted the gift of music throughout Adam HaRishon, but it needed David that knew how to fight wars. It needed David that knew how to institutionalize a country. It needed David that was able to go through his personal life in such a significant manner to say Shirah, to praise God and to thank God and to really feel very closely connected to God. Apparently, Adam HaRishon didn't have the same connection, relationship, understanding of what's the relationship between God and mankind. And that's why even in Nevi'im, when I said there's one chapter we kind of hearing this connection, this relation, the setting of the Mizmorim is uniquely already in Divrei Hayamim, because it's not only in a separate book. It's to tell us, no, it's David of Shmuel and David of Divrei Hayamim that enabled him to become David of Tehillim. Meaning Tehillim could never stand on its own merits. It could not live on its own. It could not be a separate book without a close relationship, without a setting, without, we say, a Moshav B'chaim, a Zitzin Leben, straight in Sefer Shmuel. It wouldn't work on its own. And that's why we say, I think, that my connection to David HaMelech and the way I feel, and that's why this was the path I choose to look at David HaMelech. I noted it before, that I feel that many of us, and I identify with it, sometimes have opposite kochot within us. Meaning we have different characters. We're not this, homogenic character that's simplified. We have different kochot. We have different ways we sometimes debate where we want to go. And I think that it also is demonstrated very well in David HaMelech. It's demonstrated very well that he can be a person of this and a person of this and a person of this. And really what we learned from this character and the fact that he has all these different kinds of points of view is that that's what God expects from us. To be some of this and some of this and sometimes this, but to understand that the essence of this whole thing has to be based on a real recognition of a Kadosh Baruch Hu and a connection to God. And the fact that David got his unique 150 Mizmorei Tehillim is because he knew how to go through life in all these different forefronts, but be closely related to Kadosh Baruch Hu and to say thank you. In a way that even Adam HaRishon didn't, which is why he supplements us still today and supplements Adam HaRishon for this part that sometimes is very hard for us to understand when we read the stories about Adam HaRishon. So next time you study Sefer Bereshit, think of David HaMelech and think that these things come together. And 70 years of Adam HaRishon, when you read he's died at 930, think to yourself, wait, he was understandable enough that there's something else that should be to the world, that he gave his 70 years of a gift that became so substantial to us. Thank you. Is there any questions?